Well, welcome to this afternoon's panel. We've got some very esteemed guests on the panel this afternoon. For those who don't know me, my name is Sandra A. Agard. I'm an author and a storyteller and a literature person, a book doctor. I've been working in libraries for over 40 years. And I'm currently working here at the British Library in the schools team. Where are my people? Yeah. The schools team, led by Laura. Where's Laura? Laura? Is she here? Where's Laura? Is she not here yet? Well, Laura. Anyway. Okay. And we're here today, and we're going to have a really good panel discussion. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. They're going to be short biographies. So, could you begin, please?
Thanks, Sandra. I'm Matthew Stoppard. I work for Leeds Libraries. I'm a children and young people's librarian. I buy the books for the city, and I'm involved in the programming of activities for the city.
Hi, I'm Darren Chetty. I'm a lecturer at UCL. I was a primary school teacher. I write a column with Karen Sands O'Connor for Books for Keeps, which is called Beyond the Secret Garden, which looks at the representation of racially minoritized children in mostly British children's literature. And we've got a book on that coming out, hopefully by the end of the year.
Hello, my name is Michael LaRose, and I am one of the directors of New Beacon Books, which was formed in 1966 by my father, John LaRose. And it's not really a family business, but a business of activists that carry on the work of New Beacon, because we think publishing and book selling are very important in ways of transferring information and knowledge from one generation to another.
Hello, I'm Sarah Smith. I'm the Libraries Development Manager for Brent Libraries. I am also a judge on Read for Empathy. I also do book reviews for Inclusive Books for Children. And in terms of working for Brent, I cover all ages, programming, services, and partnership working. And it's a fabulous job, not enough hours in a day.
Hello, I'm Ashley Thorpe. I am a debut middle grade author. My book, The Boy to Beat the Gods, just came out last month, so I'm pretty stoked about that. Thank you. Thank you so much. It wasn't just for the clout. I also work as an editor at an inclusive fiction studio called Storymix, so that's my day job. I'm also an associate trustee of Manchester Libraries as well. So I'm visiting from Manchester today.
Okay, the format for this afternoon, I'm going to ask our panelists a series of questions, and they will answer, hopefully, but don't worry, there'll be time for you to ask questions too. So this is your time to get, whatever burning questions you want to establish, please get them into your heads. Not long questions, okay? Is that all right? Thank you. Okay, the first question I'd like to ask our panelists is libraries and you, because that's why we're here today. It's all about libraries. So I just want to ask you, what does the word library mean to you?
In lots of words, or just...
No. Just what does the word library mean to you?
Safety and knowledge.
I can't be that succinct. I spent a lot of time in libraries as a kid. It always felt like an exciting place, and I didn't really have that sort of book mentor, that person who was like, oh, try this. I sort of scrabbled around at my own interest and trying to join up the dots. I can remember moments in libraries of looking for, particularly sort of family history. My father's South African. Under apartheid, he was categorized as Asian. And I remember looking at books in South Africa, and of course this is during apartheid, and just finding those books were only of white South Africans and flora and fauna, and knowing how different that was to actually how South Africa was. So I think from quite young, I was attuned to the fact that books are really important, but they're not always the final word on every subject.
Growing up, libraries were very important to me. Being part of an institution like New Beacon, which is a bookseller and a publisher, the library was a place of safety where we met interesting people reading to you in my library in Haringey. And the other thing about libraries was I always looked around the shelves to see what kind of books they had there. And a lot of the time I was very disappointed. Some very archaic, very racist books that were found in there.
Like Michael, I grew up going to the public library as the next place outside of home. So North Kensington Library was my local library, and I remember my mum taking myself and my sister there every Saturday. It is a tradition that is shared within our family. We've passed the baton on to the next generation. So I have 2 nephews and a niece, and they always know from Auntie Sarah, that's where they get the books, and you pass it on. But I think looking at it now as an adult and working in libraries, because funny enough, despite going to the library on a regular basis as a child, I was actually a reluctant reader. And so it took me quite a while to develop. And it's really funny because both my parents were big readers. But now when I think about libraries, I think of libraries as the community hub. So it is that space in every community. It is a place not only where you can go and borrow books, but we offer such a range of services. But also, it's a place just to be. It is, as we have already mentioned, a safe place. And so that's the place that you can go, and nobody's going to demand anything of you. If you just want to be quiet, that's where you can be. So it's books, it's services, and my golly, we offer such a range now. So that's my view on what the library means.
And that's a really lovely segue, because my word was actually sanctuary. That's what library means to me. So I grew up in Nottinghamshire, actually, that's where I'm from, in like an ex-coal mining town. Is someone from Nottingham here? Over there? I'm from Eastwood, that's where I grew up. So Eastwood Library was basically where I'd spend all of my Saturdays every 3 weeks. Cried when I couldn't take out more than 6 books sometimes, but hey, I wrote a book now, Mom, so don't be mad at me anymore. Yeah, it was basically like a space where my mom recognized really that our life chances would be massively improved by reading, and I just kind of threw myself into just reading as much as I could there and just loved reading. So that definitely was like a formative part of my identity and who I am and why I love words. And then in my current role as like an associate trustee as well at Manchester Libraries, as well as it being like a space where anyone can just come in and just spend time, it's also trying to make sure that there's enough cultural and representative events and things happening to make sure across all of the libraries, and it's quite large Manchester as well, that there's enough there for everybody in the different districts and towns that they're in.
Thanks a lot. Matthew, I feel a bit aggrieved that you only said 2 words. Do you want to add anything else to? I mean, you work in libraries obviously now. So, how did Did you think you would do that as a child? I mean, yeah.
Definitely not. So I grew up not far from Eastwood. I grew up in Claycross in Derbyshire, and it definitely wasn't on the cards to work in a library. So my stepdad was an ex-miner, and my mum worked for social services. So we went to the library, but I was a reluctant reader, and I was more likely to borrow jigsaws than read a book. And for some reason, because I've still got them, and they used to write my name on them, the newsagent would we'd receive copies of 2000 AD, which is a really violent comic that I was reading at the age of 9. So I think I've turned out pretty okay after all that. But definitely the public library in Claycross and then Chesterfield when I was a sixth former, where you'd borrow CDs and make a mini disc compilation. But that's when I've started getting properly interested in reading, and that's when like the reality of something outside of like these mining towns and maybe like reading something a bit more interesting was on the cards.
Thank you. It's because the title of this conference is Inclusive Libraries, and a question for those of you who were in Leeds on Wednesday that was asked was, what was the first book you remember where you saw yourself represented in that book? What was your first book? And if we could begin with Ashley, please. Thank you.
Sure. So I think it was from around about the age of 5 or 6 that we started going to the library, but it wasn't until I was, I think, 7 years old that I was twizzling around. I don't know if people remember, it used to be like book turners, basically. And I found a book by Mallory Blackman, I think it was Antidote, of a hacker. And I was so shocked that there was someone who looked like me on it, because up to that point, all the books I'd read, I'd never found one that had someone who looked like me. So at the age of 7, I'd already internalized that I can't be a main character in it. And I was actually shook by it. And that kind of started my long love affair of reading Mallory Blackman books. But as I said on Wednesday as well, it wasn't just at that point for me. I had a bit of a drop off. When I started secondary school, I couldn't really find the kind of books that I wanted to carry on reading. It was more manga at that point. I was getting more into comics and stuff. But not secondary school, sixth form even. It was Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses. That was a book that got me back into reading again. So twice she's basically kind of put me on the path again. So.
Saved your life. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ashley.
So for me, I mentioned earlier that I was a reluctant reader, and I only turned a corner when my family moved to Jamaica, and there was a big focus over there on needing to pass the 11 plus so you could get into a good grammar school. And my dad came from quite an affluent background. And so what happened is that the family got together, and both myself and my younger sister were sent to private education for a while so that we could get up to scratch, because before then we were just way behind. So that's when I began to develop a love of reading, and the book that was important to me is what I actually studied for what was then known as GCSE O-levels, and that was A House for Mr. Biswas, and that's by V.S. Naipaul. It's set in Trinidad. And for anyone who doesn't know Trinidad, which is a Caribbean island, Trinidad is what is described as a plural society. So what you have is the descendants of African slaves and the descendants of Indian indentured labor. And the focus is on a Trinidadian Asian family. This particular character is Mr. Biswas. And he gets married into this Asian family, and basically he's stuck in one room with his wife and children, and it's a big family, and his desperation is always to be able to get away from this family, which has a very strong matriarch, and there are other siblings, and everybody lives in one room with their children. And so his desperation is to be able to own a house of his own, which he eventually does right at the end. But because he's had no experience of house buying, the house that he buys, the steps are on the outside. So in order to get upstairs, he has to go back outside to get up to the second floor. But it resonated with me because the move to Jamaica, it wasn't easy, and it had a big impact on my parents' marriage. And I remember thinking how important it was to be able to have a home which is also your refuge. And so I think that's very important, and I can understand also with asylum seekers the importance of having a home where you feel safe.
Growing up in New Beacon and around the people who were activists around the bookshop and the book selling. It was the start of what's called the supplementary school movement. And in our supplementary school, we did a history about the Maroons of Jamaica. I'd never heard of them until I went to the supplementary school. And then I got hooked on a book, intrigued with a book called Young Warriors by Vic Reed, which was all about these Maroons, young boys, part of a guerrilla warfare against the British Army in Jamaica and winning their freedom. And that's really the detail of the fighting and the camouflage and all these new ways of fighting were very interesting to me.
So yeah, on my Twitter bio, I describe myself as a Welsh, Indian, South African, Dutch Londoner. So I'm still waiting for that book that captures that, and maybe I'll have to write it.
Got to write it, yes.
But I'm guessing they'll say there isn't a big audience for it. But certainly growing up, I did look out for books, you know, with Indian kids, with brown kids, and didn't see many. And if I did, they were racist. I mean, Mowgli and Jungle Book. The book that I think really I was struck by was The Secret Garden, which I read at age 10, and which, if you haven't read it, all of the Indian characters are dead by the end of chapter 1. And what's told is that Mary, the protagonist, is a sickly child because she's in India, which is, you know, a sickly place. So I didn't really have any books in childhood that were positive and representing people, you know, of similar backgrounds. And it wasn't until I was, I think, 18 and The Buddha of Suburbia came out, Buddha of Suburbia, Hanif Qureshi, that I read a book that was sort of, you know, about an Asian and European couple and their offspring, and was modern Britain and London and the suburbs. But childhood, it wasn't there. Yeah.
Be Kestrel for a Knave or Kes by Barry Hines, simply because I grew up in like similar circumstances, mine in town, difficult family life. And sort of finding sanctuary in nature as well, that sort of resonated with me. And the speech patterns as well, you don't sort of see it outside of sort of badly done in D.H. Lawrence novels. So Barry Hines did it with more authenticity.
Thanks a lot. I just have to add mine, because I did on the other day. And mine wasn't positive. Mine was sadly Little Black Sambo, which I know it's like a gasp in the audience. It's exactly awful book. No longer in libraries, hopefully. But as a child, that was the first book I saw. You know, dare I say myself, hated it. Hated the paper it was written on. Hated the smell. Hated the story. Hate. And but that was the only book in Marmare Library in Islington and Howard Library in Hackney. Those were my first two libraries, and it was only until I discovered a wonderful book, which is about enslaved people, but it was To Be a Slave by Julius Lester, and then The Poacher of Langston Hughes, that, you know, that I saw, you know, things could be different. And then when I didn't see books that represented me, I started to write them myself. But that's another story. Okay. Because we're talking about representation, Darren, why priorities of representation? What is urgent about it? Why is it important? Darren, please.
So the typical thing that's said is, you know, quoting Rudine Sims Bishop, is that books are windows and mirrors, and that, you know, children of Black, Asian, and you know, racialized minority backgrounds don't have those kind of mirrors, or certainly didn't have enough of them, and probably still don't. The Reflecting Realities work that the CLPE has been doing has had a big impact on the number of books being published, but often those books have smaller marketing budgets, so they don't quite have the same visibility. But I think the understated thing is that it's just important educationally for all children. That what's actually happened in a lot of children's literature and a lot of popular culture, if you think, going back to things like Star Wars, the first film, is that when we imagine sort of worlds, people of colour are often imagined out of existence. And that often happens in children's literature, which is seen to be dealing with sort of ideals, sort of ideal situations. That an ideal world seems to be one where people of colour are imagined out of existence. And that, I think, sends a very, very profound but very subtle message, which is why when the essay I wrote in The Good Immigrant quoted that 6-year-old child saying to their classmate, stories have to be about white people. And that child was very perceptive in picking out subtle messages in the culture that had led him to that conclusion. And some people, when I've narrated that, I've said, that child must have low self-esteem. And I think that really psychologizes what's actually a social issue, which is the esteem in which black children, Asian children in this country are held, and how they get those social messages from all around, news, etc., but they primarily get them from the literature they encounter. And equally, that white children grow up with a belief that is there from the start of English literature with Robinson Crusoe, which is that the world is made for us to run. We can go where we want and claim dominion. And then if we encounter the other, we don't even have to ask them a question. We just tell them who they are. And, in the case of Robinson Crusoe, expect them to be subservient. So that's my long, but I hope relevant answer to that.
Absolutely, because I think that leads on nicely to Ashley and your book there. The importance of fantasy fiction. Why do you think that's important to write, well, your book, if you could maybe say?
Well, fantasy is traditionally a space which has been very Eurocentric. When most people think of the word fantasy, they probably most likely go to like a medieval kind of setting, incredibly European-based. But there have been people in the past that have been markers, but I guess a few and far between, Octavia Butler and writers of such. Even I guess Mallory Blackman's to an extent. But yeah, I wrote an article for the bookseller earlier this year in which I said I don't think, particularly for middle grade, which is the category that I write for, 9 to 12 years old, I don't think there's been a time where the literature has been as rich as it is now, because you're seeing a lot of often first-time writers from lots of different cultures writing their authentic experience to the books, and it's allowing this window into worlds that you may know nothing about. And surely, right, that's what literature is about. It's about stepping into somebody else's shoes and developing empathy and seeing these worlds. So for me, with fantasy, it was super important to me to actually have a book and a cover with this like dark-skinned black protagonist with afro hair, because I would have loved to have seen that when I was younger. I just did not see that at all, right? And to have this fantasy setting, which is actually based on Yoruba mythology of what's now present-day Nigeria. And yeah, just to explore that pantheon of gods. And also, whenever I go and do my school visits and my talks, I try and explain from world mythology just how similar a lot of these deities are to canons around the world as well. So that's like an interesting seed right there to kind of spring from, to show how we are so connected, and there's more that kind of does connect us than makes us different.
Absolutely. I have to say that you write in that book about fantasy, and you say there's the window has now opened. I remember when I was a young writer many hundreds of years ago, I was talking to a white editor, and I said, I write fantasy and science fiction, and she categorically said, black people do not write science fiction or fantasy.
Well, you see right now the reaction to people, say Star Wars, for example. A black person in space, heaven forbid,
yeah,
know. Aliens are cool, but like...
that's another story for another day. Anyway, but thank you. Do you want to say something about your book there? Remember
Oh, me?
Yeah, are you not?
Sorry. To plug it in general? Oh, sorry, I am doing a book giveaway. Thank you for the cues there. Sorry. I will be giving away this copy of the book at the end of the session, so there will be like a minor pop quiz on something that I said today.
You're going to have to listen closely to everything he says.
Sorry.
Yeah,
It's been a long day. Was
Yeah,
not
I know,
getting
a long
the
day.
cue.
Okay.
Is there something you would like to say?
Okay. So, writing, publishing, Michael. Can I ask you, have you seen the landscape of publishing change? Have you seen it change over the years? And if not, what needs to happen?
Right. I just wanted to just add on to the last
No
bit
problem.
of the conversation and give a quote, a kind of general philosophy of life that my father, John LaRose, made. He said, liberation is in the imagination.
He was a
And-
great man, sorry.
And that can really encompass all our work in libraries, in writing, in publishing, etc. We're taking off the shackles of imagination and giving freedom to think and go places that we want to go. As to the question of publishing, New Beacon started off as an independent publisher because we thought it was very important that we kind of control our information and control what we wanted to publish. We encourage all independent publishers who want to go down that road. And today, the change is a lot of young people, maybe under 30, are going to produce children's books because of their own experience here in Britain. The other thing is, since the pressure of people like New Beacon over the years, the pressure of the black education movement looking for justice for their children and proper education for their children, it's put pressure on the politicians who've then decided that the structures needed to change, especially the library services and teaching and school libraries. That changed again with the cuts and austerity and the restructuring of schools so that the head teacher becomes the person that decides what's going to be in school. Then we had another wave of the Black Lives Matter especially, which really not forced, but made mainstream publishers who would not deal with black topics or black issues, even the question of science fiction, really hunt down those artists, those writers, and that work, which is a good thing and which should happen anyway. It should not need to be forced upon them. But also, we know that if it becomes non-profitable, then they'll drop them as well. So that the independent publishers are really important for the continuation of information, continuation of knowledge, and continuation of culture.
Thank you very much. Leading on from there, a question for Matthew and Sarah. How do you ensure your communities, therefore, feel seen, feel heard? Is it through your book stock, in other ways? How do you feel? How do you show that they've been seen? Yeah?
How many hours have you got?
Not long.
Well, okay. So Brent is a very diverse community. We're the second most diverse borough in London. So we have a significant Asian and African populations, but also newer arrivals from Europe. So what we try to do in terms of our programming is to have that reflected in what we offer. So we've got things like ESOL classes which we run, but for instance, if I use the example of under fives, we are going to this autumn be running book trust story times for under fives in different languages, because what we've realized is, to give an example of the Brazilian community who live in Harsden, we're just not getting that take up. You can hop across the road from the library for a lovely coffee, but basically the Brazilian community are not coming into the library to use our services to improve their English language skills and for their children to get involved. So we are constantly having to assess the services that we offer. So in terms of pictures, publicity, we always make sure that it reflects the diversity of Brent. The other thing that we need to think about is not just in terms of the range of diverse stock that we have on our shelves, but it's also about identity in terms of history. So being able to get the message out that, for instance, Black people didn't just arrive during the Windrush period. We have been here for much longer, and not just in the case of Black people, Asian people, people from different diverse backgrounds. We had a speaker who came in and gave us a talk on Black Tudors, and it was an absolutely fascinating talk. And it was about the fact that there was a middle class of Black people living in this country. Now, that isn't taught in the curriculum at all. It was so fascinating. So it's just when we're thinking about inclusion and what we want our local communities to see when they come into libraries, it is that breadth of books, but books not just in terms of fiction, but in terms of history as well, and history that goes way beyond the Windrush, where you can see yourself, but also getting that message out to everyone that this is a united kingdom, and no one group can say, right, it's just my country.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
So I'm feeling the weight of all the library people in the room.
And it's a lightweight.
Well, I don't know. So I have to. There was so much that Sarah mentioned, but like logistically, I mean, this might be the boring stuff, but there'll be lots of librarians like wondering how they can increase inclusivity in their book stock, because there simply isn't time, or I don't think there are many local authorities that have the time to handpick all the books. So it's about your relationship with the book supplier. So we use Peters, and when I came into my role, I looked at what's called the stock specification, and it sort of gave an identity to different parts of the city, and I thought that didn't really make sense, because we've already mentioned on the panel is that why would you send one type of book to one certain type of person? Like everyone should be reading all the books. So we did that in the first instance, and above everything that we do, when it's written into the stock spec, so it's signed off and in writing, is that Peters are contractually obliged to give us the most diverse stock for that amount of money that we give them. But then they have a problem, and Michael's already touched on this, is that, and Darren as well, is that the publishers are throwing their weight behind the big authors who are celebrities already. So how do you get around that? So maybe a lot of local authorities have a book awards for children, and I think that's one of the best ways to do it, because you give the power to the children to vote for the books that are on the shelves, and they can see themselves in those books. And we did that last year with the Leeds Book Awards. Like the YA winner was Benjamin Dean, The King is Dead, which is just an excellent intersectional book. And we were sort of being public servants to those children and making sure that the books that they want are on the shelves and that they're seen. And also in the programming, I don't know, sometimes I think we can be lazy as librarians and work with such and such who we worked with last year and not push ourselves to come to events like this and meet amazing authors, and then book them for the programming for the following year.
Oh, that's good. Booking is good. Booking is good. Thank you very much. Excellent. Darren, identity. Yeah. What? Why? Why is it important? Why is it important? I know, I'm sorry. Is that too big a question?
Okay. I have something to say about this,
Yeah,
which is
okay.
that
You did.
I'm not sure necessarily always foregrounding identity is the most useful way when we look at literature, which doesn't, contradict what I've already said. I think what literature does is especially children's literature, is it's often talking about the development and formation of identity. So identity is a process rather than as a fixed end. And that's really important for writing good literature. And it's really important, I think, when you're writing from a minoritized background, that you're able to talk about, different ways of being and not unwittingly sort of essentialize yourself and your characters to fit particular audiences. So I think we just need to think in terms of stories and just the very many stories that have been sort of gate-kept historically. As I said, going back to Robinson Crusoe, that whole people's stories have been gate-kept. So yes, identity is part of that. But thinking about stories, accepting that we will interact with stories in different ways. Some of the criticism I get for the work that I do and the work that people on the panel do is this sort of idea of, this is sort of narcissistic. You're saying you can only read stories if the character looks like you. And clearly that isn't the case. You want a broad range of stories that you can select from. So we need to be careful not to, in the way we communicate with young people, assume that they will want stories about people who are gendered the same as them, racialized the same, classed the same. They will want to explore, and they have every right to, and they should be encouraged to. But what we also want to ensure is that within that choice, there are options that are closer to their own backgrounds.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I'd just like to say that I remember going to New Beacon as a small child. Well, I was secondary school, not secondary school, but a very good English teacher took us, myself and another student. We were the writers of the class, and we went to New Beacon Books when it was the front room in the house, not the shop. And meeting your beloved father was, I'll never forget, to see this man surrounded by books, and he owned this shop. It blew my mind, and you can't be what you can't see. And to see John La Rose, it just cemented something in me that I knew I'm not going to be a bookseller, but I wanted one of my books to be in that shop. And I know I've told you the story so many times, but I wanted to say everybody hear it. I'm forever grateful to him and Sarah White for what they did to me as that young child age. I was thinking about 14. So thank you. Just want to say that. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Oh gosh. Oh, sorry. I think we've got to get questions from the audience now. I could go on forever. Questions from the audience. Oh, that's what you meant by 10 minutes. I thought we had 10 minutes here. Okay. What we're going to do now, yes, because if you've thought of some questions, we'd like to have questions from you. So we've got a roving mic, and Jasmine will run up the stairs. Thank you.
I've been struggling to get books on faith that don't put faith as an issue. Because often their characters seem to be restricted by their faith. They've got strict parents who say you must do this, must do that, and it's a taboo in the book. So can any of you recommend any books that are about faith but don't necessarily have it as the main problematic subject?
Have you read Fight Back by A.M. Dasu? So I think, it's all about different faiths and how the faiths can be sort of used together to sort of fight authority in school. So it's a YA, maybe Key Stage 3 into sort of young Key Stage 4.
Upper Key Stage 2, I've read it as well.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's really good.
I was also going to just add to that. I'm not sure if you're aware of Empathy Lab and Read for Empathy, because if you go to that website, I'm one of the judges. I help with the selection for books aimed at secondary school children, but we also do a collection for primary school children, and it's produced annually. You will find books in there which include faith. They're written as fiction because faith isn't necessarily the main theme, but there are protagonists who come from different faith backgrounds. So I would highly recommend titles in those collections.
And I'll just chip in. Zainab Mian's Planet Omar series, which started as a self-published book called The Muslims, and is in that sort of style of Tom Gates' Diary of a Wimpy Kid, does a brilliant job of having a sort of contemporary Muslim boy as the protagonist in a family, and the stories are funny, but there'll be bits about his faith as well, without it being a sort of instructional text. I'd also say, with Beyond the Secret Garden, we wrote a column on Jewish representation in British children's literature, and how that there aren't that many. I mean, Michael Rosen is sort of an industry in himself, and writes typically from a sort of secular Jewish perspective, although historically he'll talk about relatives of his. But there are books out there that you know, in that column. It's online and free, so that would be another place I'd say. And Nazneen's book, I mean, Nazneen spoke earlier, didn't she? There's another conference going on today, which is Sailfest, which is South Asian literature. So a lot of people there are talking, you know, not all, but many, from a sort of the faith's an element of their characters in their sort of South Asian texts. Yeah.
So in other words, there's loads. It's all right, I've got big ones. Okay, another question?
I wanted to ask, in regards to promoting an exclusive book, where's the fine line between classing a book as exclusive versus the mainstream? Because one of the kind of counter arguments you could say about promoting inclusive books is that it becomes a category in of itself, rather than this is a book, it's part of the mainstream, it's equally as popular as in the mainstream, right? There shouldn't be a distinction between a book supposedly classed as inclusive. So when would we reach a point of that, and you know, where's the line, and how do you balance that to ensure that you're not promoting these books as distinctive from the mainstream?
I can try and answer that, I guess. It goes back to the question that I think Darren was asked earlier of identity. If I speak to my experience, where I'm hoping that kids will read this and just see like a mythological adventure, in the same way that they'd say read Percy Jackson, but no one's going Rick Riordan, you know, the European American author, in the same way that, and this is no shade to my publisher, but on my bio on the website, it's Ashley is a Black British author, which I wouldn't necessarily like leave with myself. But on the flip side of that, it is also important that kids see that authors also can look like this and not like a specific thing as well. So it's flip side of a coin, I guess. And we do live in the society we live in when, unfortunately, we are socialized to, or conditioned to be racialized in the ways that we are as well. So it will continue to be important, I guess, until the point where, if we ever get there, it's not anymore. But I highly doubt that is going to come, to be fair, really. So publishers are, and it is mostly the publishers who are going to push it in a certain way, obviously. They are going to push to say, like, hey, we are doing the work, and here is this author and whatnot. But yeah, in the same breath as that, I do hope that at the end of the day, people who are buying the books, or teachers, librarians, parents, are also going to say, oh, this is not just for X person. In the same way that none of the other mainstream books, I guess, are in that sense as well. So, yeah.
I was just going to add to that we don't keep our books in one section. So in Brent Libraries, and I'm sure the case is for most library services, that it's a mix-up. And I think that's good, because that's getting the message out that these books are for everyone, as against having to sort of go to a particular section. The other thing that we need to do more of, and I am ever so conscious of the fact that it's due to staffing capacity, but if we want to be able to tell children about the amazing books out there and going beyond Enid Blyton and David Walliams, we need to be able to, for instance, go into schools and do that, give those talks where we are enthusiastic, telling children about the different books. I do an annual talk every year to a particular trust, and it's aimed at teachers, telling them about the amazing books, because I'm very aware that they don't have the time to read all those books. I myself struggle to try and keep on top of the amazing books that are coming out, and I'm grateful that I do book reviews for the Empathy Lab and for Inclusive Books for Children, but I would say that one of the ways of getting children enthused is that we do need to go into schools and talk about those wonderful books and the range.
Yeah, just a sort of really sort of I mean, it's the same thing I'm saying, but a sort of grounded example. So Zainab Mian's book, I would hope to see it. If you're doing displays in a library, you'd expect to see it in a display around Muslim books. You'd expect to see it in South Asian books. You'd also expect to see it in funny books, or books that are with text and illustration throughout, or books about school kids. You know, so there's lots of ways. So I'm always aware that if you're only seeing the book, which comes back to the identity thing, if you're only seeing it as, oh, this is a Muslim book, then you're missing out on all the other things it is. So it's being aware when you encounter these books of all the things they are, and ensuring that you're joining the dots and helping your young readers to join the dots, I think.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is a societal issue. And until that imbalance and that put into the side of anybody's culture or literature or issues, this will continue. And it will continue by people like yourselves in libraries trying to change that imbalance. And that's the point of us being here, really, is talking about there is a problem in society, and we recognize it, or we hope we recognize it, and then something has to be done. Until it doesn't make a difference. And the mainstream is the mainstream for everybody.
May I follow with one more point on that, actually? I will not name the book. And again, this isn't a thing about the writer or the book itself. It's about how it's positioned in the market. And this pertains to how books and how writers are valued as well. So the blurb on a very successful book which came out in the last 12 months, it goes something like this. First there was Tolkien, then there was Morpurgo, then there was Philip Pullman, now there is X author. And that list itself, what that is saying about children's literature is how they're valued and what kind of writers they are. One for one, they're all white men who begun with that list, which again says something about how things are valued and this kind of canon and this idea of what makes a classic. That in itself that kind of needs to be challenged, and the value placed on other books. Sorry, I just did that. I'm not doing it from my book especially. Just in general terms, like how we value books from non-white male authors and such, basically. That is important, and that does need to be challenged in terms of how it's then being fed to younger minds as well. The example I gave you of like the shock of finding this one book that had a character that looked like me, and the internalization, that is happening on a similar level to various different kids who aren't getting books in front of them that they maybe need to be seeing themselves or others, and knowing that they can be heroes, and knowing that they actually don't need to be the sidekicks in the story. And yeah, that can see themselves in fantasy settings and just have escapism and not just urban settings or whatever it is. So,
thank you. Do you want to do your...
Yes. So yeah, really just want to say thank you to all the librarians. You do such an incredible job, and teachers as well. I know you're all here. I would love this to go to like a really great home, either in your classrooms or in your school libraries. So, very simple question. I mentioned where I grew up. Oh, hand has gone up immediately there. Eastwood, yeah, the book is yours. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure that you have had yet another stimulating and fascinating afternoon. We could go on, and I know, sadly, we have to come to an end. It's been illuminating, and it's been an honour, delight, joy to sit and be part of this. And I'm sure that you have enjoyed it too. And I'm sure you've got lots of more questions. And I hope they've given you something to go by. I mean, leading from Jeffrey this morning to now, it's just been such a delightful day. A day of celebration, a day of journey, of heroes, stories, dreamers, doers, and dare I say, library folk, you. Can we please give a big clap to our panel?